turn to Big Bill Neal, MMR, for some comments on these track designs. Bill?
How much time you got, Jim? I can kind of eat about 15 minutes up if we can do it.
Yep.
All right. By the way, Martin, that was a nice presentation. Thank you. Let me get my video sharing going here, and we'll see how this works here.
Don't give him a big head now. He's going to ask for more money.
I know, it's tough. Yeah. Let's see. Share screen. There we go. And we're going to share this guy right here. Make this full screen. And I'm going to go into my slideshow. Here we go. I thought I'd talk about grades tonight. See how that was playing with people. I know most folks find grades a little challenging, so we'll play around with a little bit, and talk about some mathematics on it. First of all, let's talk about grade calculations. A lot of you guys probably have a good idea what this stuff is, but you'll see grades expressed as a 1-in calculation sometimes for prototype grades. So if you took a 2% grade, that's really a 2-inch rise and a 100-inch run. Now, people in the prototype world will talk about that as a 1 in 50 grade. You'll also see stuff like, a 1 in 75 grade or something like that. You have to convert that, if you will, into a percentage to kind of take that into model form. Like a 3% grade is a 1 in 33. That's a pretty doggone steep grade for most prototypes. But that's kind of how grades are calculated, just to make sure people understand. Now, these are normal, what I would consider normal heavy grades on the prototype. The Pensy ran about 1.9, 1.87 across horseshoe curve. Would have been about a 3% if they hadn't built the horseshoe curve and wrapped it down around that valley. Sandpatch hit about 2% coming up the hill. That made those 210-2s really work hard. Getting through the Cascade Tunnel, that Great Northern hit about 2.2. And that's about the same as the Tehachapi Loop on the Southern Pacific, getting through the Cascades. Pretty steep grades, but there were worse. The Madison Incline, of course, is the steepest mainline grade. And that was the son of a gun. You can kind of get some ideas here. Madison Incline was a 1 in 17, or about almost 6% grade. And that was the steepest mainline grade. The Cass Scenic Railway goes up a 1 in 9 grade, which is about 11%. That's pretty steep. And then you have about a 4% grade on the Saluda, North Carolina grade. This was a pretty tough grade as well, too. That's all fine and good, but how does this affect model stuff? I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can see that grades really were challenging, even a 1% grade, caused railroads a lot of trouble. Penn Pilot, that's a website. They have a bunch of these photographs taken in 1939 across the state of Pennsylvania. If you haven't explored Penn Pilot, do a Google on it and take a look at it. They had some poor airplane guy and a photographer out photographing all of the agricultural land for an agricultural study. And a lot of these photographs are available through Penn State and something called Penn Pilot. And of course, as they were photographing the agricultural lands, they caught all kinds of railroads running. You can see pictures of East Broad Top in operation, the Penn City, the B&O. Anybody that crossed Pennsylvania, you can take a good look at. This is a shot of the area that I modeled. It's the Panhandle on the Pennsylvania. You can see here that there's a modest length train of maybe 70 cars, maybe 60 cars, and there's a locomotive at the front and there's a locomotive at the back pushing. So it was a significant grade for people. I thought this was a neat picture. You can see the engines there. I got them circled in red now.
Excuse me, Bill.
Yeah.
I just went to look up Penn Pilot.
Yeah.
And they've taken it down.
They
do give an alternative though.
Do they?
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to take a look at that before I talk anything more about it. I captured these pictures back when they were running it, and that's too bad, because I had this image of this old biplane flying over Pennsylvania with a guy leaning over the edge of the airplane with a camera, one of the glass slide cameras, taking pictures, trying to hold the camera on as they were running along at about 75 miles an hour up in the air. And they're amazing shots. That's too bad. I will have to go research that and find out where the alternative is. But thanks for pointing that out to me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the Zoom
Yeah,
or in
thank
the
you.
chat.
Okay. So we start talking about prototype tractive efforts. You can see that an F7 put out about 40,000 pounds, a GP9 about 44,000, GP38 was maybe 54,000. Steam engines generally had a higher tractive effort, but then again, they were running by themselves. You put two diesels together, you can easily meet two or three diesels easily exceeds a 210.2 or 280, a 210, excuse me. And the Pensy, all these things are give you just a rough idea of what they can pull. Means very little to us from a model standpoint, though. Model trains have considerably less pull, of course. I don't care if you want to talk about traction tires or adding weight or additional axles in a 6-axle engine versus a 4-axle engine or lower gearing. Just forget about all that stuff. Just measure the tractive effort coming out the back end of the engine, and you get numbers like this. They vary anywhere from 3 ounces, maybe 2.6 ounces, all the way up to 4 ounces in HO, 5 ounces in HO. End scale, end scale is considerably smaller, of course. I'm going to probably work on the HO stuff most in this presentation because I'm most familiar with it, first of all, and secondly, it's most popular. But I think anybody modeling N scale or any of the other scales can probably extrapolate some of the ideas. But you'll see that a lot of these numbers really vary. They really average out about 3 to 3.5 ounces per engine if you really get down to it. And that's a pretty good number to work with. There are tools available. Micromart used to offer this thing right here, which would measure in digital down to 1/10 of an ounce what the pull was. I just looked this guy up. It's a little bit larger item. It was, I think, about $9 or $10, and it will measure down to hundredths of an ounce. So you can play with that a little bit. These guys are pretty easy to get a hold of, and you can measure your tractive effort on your engines. And when you start planning your grades, you don't want to use the most powerful engine you've got to do your planning. You want to use the average engine, the engine you're probably most likely going to run in front of the local, because you don't want to double head or push on a local. That's got to be able to run all over your railroads. So you need to measure that engine and figure out how much pulling power it has. So when you begin to do these calculations, you get an idea what you're doing. Now, I'm going to talk about the grade profile of my railroad and show you how I did the calculation. And just as in general, a good way to kind of think about this stuff. Now I'm going to do something called hand grenade math. It's close enough to do the job. It's not perfect. Okay. So bear with me on this stuff. Now, if you see my railroad, there's a level area. There's about 4 foot of a 1% grade going up to the Ohio River Bridge, and then coming back down. And again, we're back on level. And then there's a long 2% grade going almost 2 scale miles up to Burgettstown. And these kinds of grades have a different effect on the train. And I'm going to show you how that works. I'm going to use a typical engine that has about 3 to 3.5 ounces of tractive effort. Now, Model Railroader says an ounce of tractive effort will pull 14 cars. I think that's a little conservative. I think it's closer to 15. So I'm going to talk about that kind of a number. Now, I know we don't all run 30-car trains, but you can take a look at the mathematics here and understand how this works and do your calculations based. I mean, if you run a 12-car train or a 20-car train or whatever it is, you can use this math for it. If I take a typical 30-car train, the rolling resistance of this train will be about 2 ounces. In other words, the engine's got to produce about 2 ounces of tractive effort to move this on level ground. If you take a typical engine producing about 3 to 3.5 ounces, no problem. Okay, so let's put him on a grade here. Now, coming up on, this is the Ohio River Bridge on my railroad, and coming up to it, we've got this 1% grade, but it's only 4 foot long. Now, running 40-foot boxcars in HO scale, they take about 6 inches each, so 8 cars are on this grade. So 8 cars produce a bit of a force backwards. And these cars weigh about 4 ounces each. So if you take a look at the calculation, you can say, gee, I've got 8 cars on this little 1% grade. Each of those 8 cars weighs 4 ounces. So 1% of 32 ounces, that's the total, is about 1/3 of an ounce pulling back against the locomotive. So now we've taken the 2 ounces of rolling resistance, and we're going to add 1/3 of an ounce of resistance going up the hill. My typical engine, when pulling at 3 ounces, can pull a train up onto the bridge with no problem. And that's exactly what I wanted. So you can pull up onto the bridge. It's great. Now, let's go up onto the ruling grade, and they call it a ruling grade usually because the entire train gets on the grade. In this case, we've got all our 30 cars up here, and the 30 cars, well, if you take the 30 cars weighing 4 ounces each, that's 120 ounces of train times the grade, which is 2%. We now have 2.4 ounces pulling backward, trying to come back down the grade on this train. So we have the rolling resistance of the 30 cars, which is 2 ounces. We've got 2.4 ounces new pressure pulling us back down the grade. And of course, the locomotive has to lift itself up the grade. So we've lost maybe 1/2 ounce of tractive effort when we put on the grade. Now, again, this is hand grenade math. I majored in physics, so I have a pretty good idea that this is not perfect, but it's close. So this whole deal, all this total is a backwards pull, I should say, of about 4.9 ounces. In other words, you got 4.9 ounces of resistance. This poor locomotive is not going to be able to pull the grade with 30 cars. You can use that as a good calculation. So what do? Well, you put a locomotive on the back. Now you add a second 3 ounces of push. The second engine has to lift itself. So there's a little bit of 1/2 ounce of that locomotive being pulled backwards, or you lose that tractive effort. But together, these two engines will produce about 5 ounces of tractive effort, which exceeds the 4.9 ounces of backward pull. In other words, it can push the train up the hill, just barely. Either of these locomotives fails, the other locomotive will simply stall on the hill. It will not stringline the train or bunch the train if you operate this way. And it's a neat operation. Here's a picture of the grade on my railroad. Of course, Craig Wilson added some smoke for me. I really like this picture. I've got a 482 coming up the hill on the number 4 track, and probably a 282 coming up on the number 2 track. And behind those guys is a pusher. In some cases, 2 pushers, usually a 210-0. Here's a pair of pushers working a coal train. This is happened to be like a 50-car train. It required a couple of pushers working upward. So you get an idea how the grades can be a huge operational challenge, and they can be a lot of fun to work with, particularly with DCC and independent control. You have somebody working to help our engines, and they can have a grand time. Most of the guys coming down in my basement are yelling, "Helper, helper, I got the helper job," and there's usually an argument and an arm wrestling operation before somebody solves who gets that job, because it's a lot of fun. So now, of course, passenger trains didn't get pushed. That was absolutely verboten. They usually had 2 or 3 engines on the front. In this case, the mail train coming up the hill here has a pair of locomotives on the front. Okay, that's it, Jim. That's all I got on grades.
Oh, I think that's fascinating. I learned a lot from it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You have a question in the chat.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it says, does it make a difference between 2 engines pulling or a puller and a pusher when modeling?
I've not seen that particularly. The pusher, you can't use a pusher if the single engine can take the entire train up the hill, because that creates problems. That creates train dynamic problems that will cause derailments. However, if you follow the approach I took, which is that a single engine cannot take the whole train up the hill, you got to have both, then the 2 engines can work, and they don't even have to be synchronized. One can be slipping a little bit, but as long as they're both pushing or pulling, the whole train will move up the hill. Model trains, it's odd. Model trains have completely different physics than real trains. Real trains will slow down and see a lot higher friction on curves. Oddly, curves with long framed locomotives, we have used sharp curves in the model sense. Like my 210-0s, they will grip better in a curve than they will on the straight, because they're kind of ratcheted into the track more rigorously than they are on straight track. So they'll pull better in a curve. So it's completely different physics just about than real railroads, or at least variation on the physics.
Yeah, you can't scale physics.
Yeah, it's a weird deal.
Well, Bill, thanks so very much. Look forward to your next one. Thank you.
Jim,
Okay, you're welcome.
I
Maybe a little bit yet, Jim, before I get another presentation together. So bear with me on that.
Yeah, that's fine. Just let me know.
Sure, will do.
Thanks.